Welcome to a Times of Israel Behind the Headlines panel discussion. We're talking today about the complex relationship between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel. Arabs comprise a fifth of the population, and ties have always been fraught. Recent events brought the relationship into very sharp relief. In May, during 11 days of fighting between Israel and Gaza, against the backdrop of tensions over the Temple Mount and property rights in Jerusalem, riots erupted in Israeli cities with mixed Jewish and Arab populations, leading to the deaths of several Jewish and Arabs, along with injuries and property damage. At the same time, the Islamist Ra'am Party emerged as a decisive player, a tiebreaker in the fragile coalition politics of Israel's new government, marking the first time an Israeli government embraced an Arab party with open arms, as well as the first time an Arab party jumped into government with 2 feet. With that as backdrop, it remains for Israelis to figure out how to live in day-to-day reality, together or separately, with suspicion, with hope, with some kind of path forward. And 2 people who are living and breathing these questions are with us here today. I'm excited and delighted to have with us here Dani Elazar, the CEO of the Hand in Hand or Yad B'Yad School Network, where Arab and Jewish children learn together. Before stepping into that role in 2018, Dani was vice president of Israel programs at the Shalom Hartman Institute and has held other senior positions in the social sector. And Sally Abed, she's a staff member and an elected member of the national leadership of Standing Together, a grassroots activist group that works on the Arab-Jewish divide, together with a variety of other social interests. In recent years, Sally has become a prominent Palestinian voice on Israel, in Israel on multiple issues. So let's just start with a snapshot of what your work is. Dani, can you start by telling us what it is you do at Yad B'Yad?
Sure. Thank you very much for having us. Hand in Hand is a bilingual, multicultural network of schools and communities. Actually, it's the only one that brings together Jews and Arabs, Jewish families on a daily basis, based on equality and promoting shared society in Israel. The Israeli public system, educational system, is built in tracks. We have a Jewish track, we have an Arab track. The Jewish track is also split into sub-tracks, and the same the Arab track. What Hand in Hand is doing is we're bridging both tracks, the Jewish and the Arab, and bringing Jews and Arabs to study together in schools which demonstrate equality, 50-50% staff and students study both languages, Arabic and Hebrew, all holidays, all cultures in one school on an equal level. We have 7 locations in Israel. We're located in 7 locations in Israel and have over 2,000 students and 10,000 communities spread across the country, live together on a day-to-day basis, studying together with a very vibrant community life, also for parents and families. Our vision is to have such a campus in every mixed city or region in Israel, which will be a beacon for shared society and equality in Israel, and which will impact the public education altogether in Israel, the communities and the cities and Israeli society all over the country.
Excellent, thanks, Dani. And Sally, can you please tell us about the Standing Together movement?
Of course. Standing Together is actually the largest Arab-Jewish grassroots movement in Israel that is based on the holistic view of seeing the interconnectedness, between the struggles for peace, equality, and social justice. What we do is basically try and bring the tradition of organizing. We organize people locally and nationally around issues, catalyzing issues. It could be something about, Jewish-Arab relations within Israel. It could be about, the occupation and the struggle for peace, and it could be about social economic issues such as housing or healthcare or income security, and of course we also lead along other partners such as Green Course and Power to the Workers. We lead the Green New Deal, the Israeli Green New Deal. So we really are, it is an Arab-Jewish movement under the very deep understanding that we won't be able to advance the struggle for peace and ending occupation without advancing equality and social justice in Israel, and vice versa. We won't be able to live in a just and equal society in Israel without ending the occupation. We also have 3,000 members. We are a democratic movement, almost 3,000 monthly sustaining members, tens of thousands of supporters and volunteers and activists around us who work on national level as well as locally on our local chapters. We have 8 chapters locally as well as 7 student chapters. We also organize students on campuses. And that's it, really. I'm more than happy to talk more about our work, but that's the gist of it.
I want to hear more about it, but I want to get just a little bit personal for a moment. I'm interested in what got you both to jump into this. Many people are worried about these issues, but very few choose to spend their waking hours or maybe their sleeping hours working towards this change. And I know decisions are made based on multiple factors, but can you choose one decisive experience that pushed you in this direction? And I start with you, Sally.
What really pushed me in that direction? I don't think I ever had. I felt like I had a choice not to. I think what the question is not what pushed me to do this. It's the question of why I did it, why I chose Arab-Jewish partnership. I think that's the question, which is not the easy choice. Believe me, not as a Palestinian and not as a young person who from the normalizing the hegemony and normalizing the systemic discrimination. And from the Jewish side, of course, you get a lot of conditional partnership and a lot of all the challenges that come from being a Palestinian, trying to partner with the Jewish community here. But I think it's the very feeling. I remember in 2018, for example, when the nation-state law was passed, and I remember being very frustrated, not only because that was the part where I felt like I had a lot of Jewish solidarity, a lot of Jewish partners around me who really opposed it. And that was amazing. That was a very amazing feeling. But then I remember that also being very frustrated about the fact that I can't afford a house and that I can't, I'm an environmental activist too, and I'm a feminist, and I have so much more to advance, and with such limited area, because as a Palestinian activist in Israel, you are expected to advance Arab-Jewish relations and advance, the peace process without really, seeing the interconnectedness of all of things and the fact that we are a part of this society and we are citizens, and without really deepening our partnership through these shared struggles, we really won't be able to really reach a true partnership and a true understanding of how we will reach, a peaceful, resolution and a just and equal society.
So while you had to make a leap into doing Arab-Jewish working together, Dani is working on a model that's completely targeting that exact idea. So my question to you, Dani, can you give sort of maybe a crystallizing moment that compelled you to move into this kind of organization?
Sure. Yeah. It's always a process. You have those moments, but it's always a process. I'll just say I was involved in pluralistic Judaism for many years, for 15 years, founding a school, building a campus, such a campus here where I live in Modi'in, and then in the Hartman Institute. It's interesting because we always talked about the importance of what it means to be a democracy and what are the Jewish values in connecting between today as a majority and a minority in Israel. And we've dealt with that a lot, and we've also seen it as a goal in bringing that into the curriculum of the public system in Israel, and using both democratic values and Jewish values in dealing with these kind of topics. And at a certain point, somebody who worked with me said, you know, it's very nice we teach about it and we deal with it, but we're not doing anything. We're not actually doing anything. And he was in charge of the Galilee region, of the northern region, where we have 50% Arabs and 50% Jews. And we said, let's start acting on it also, and not only talking about it and not only teaching about it. And I think that one of those moments was when I understood that we as Jews, as a majority in Israel, I'll be very straightforward and open here, many of us talk about it, say many times the right things about it, but we don't actually deal with it. We don't actually act. We don't create this connection. We don't bridge between the two societies in order to create a real and deep partnership, and not only one that's you know, in curriculum or in talking or and so on. And I think that was one of the moments when we started actually to build, and I won't talk too much about, but when we start to create the program and we start to work together, Arabs and Jews on this program, and work with educators, Arab educators on the program, suddenly so many things that opens your eyes in so many ways, the actual partner, the actual day-to-day living together. And we started that in the Hartman Institute, and then moving into hand in hand and really moving into a day-to-day partnership, changed the whole perspective of how we look at what's crucial for Israeli society today. And bringing together, and that connects to what Sally said, and bringing together and to create partnerships along all topics. It's not only one issue, it's how do we work together to create a better society and a much more democratic society here in Israel.
Oh, we're talking, apropos of today, we're talking just a couple months after the events in May. The headlines said mixed cities were on fire, and we've had some time for the embers to cool down. How strong an impact did that have on your work, Dani?
That's very interesting because I'm sure Sally would agree with me. This was quite a shock those first days. We were like, I mean, there are many parts of it that weren't very surprising, but it was a shock how intense it was. And it's a process. It didn't start in those days. It began before. It began in stopping buses from going up to Al-Aqsa, and it began in Sheikh Jarrah. And those days of violence were like the strongest days or the most intense days. And it's interesting because it was in a week of vacation from school. It was a Fitr, and immediately afterwards Shavuot. So it was a week of vacation. Of course, we're the only school system that had the full week because we have both holidays. And in the first days, we were thinking, maybe it's good that we're not together for these first days. Maybe it's the right thing to happen where we stay apart for these days to get over them a bit. But it took us a couple of days to understand the opposite. It's terrible. Because everybody, all kids and families were staying in their homes. Jews were watching the Hebrew media, Arabs were watching the Arab media, two separate narratives as usual, two different narratives, opposite narratives, and nobody was seeing the more complex situation that we're talking about. And we started bringing people back together within the holidays. And we started, of course, with the educational staff and with the parents, because you can't bring the kids where the adults go through some kind of dialogue process. And we saw how when people know each other, when people have trust in each other, how they can start creating that dialogue again. And it was tough, and there was a lot of frustration and a lot of pain, and also blaming on both sides. But people could talk to each other because they know each other, they trust each other, and they love each other, many of them. They're in the same program, they're actually, it's not program, they're in the same mission of creating shared society, and they're there day to day. And initial staff, we brought the teachers, and then after Shavuot, the students came back to school. And also there, we weren't sure what will happen. Will all students come back? We have Jewish students who are coming into Arab cities, and we have Arab students coming into Jewish neighborhoods. Will they come back to school? Within a couple of days, everybody was back in school. And I think that's a great lesson. That's what we have to learn, that we have intense days. There are extremists who are trying to create violence, but we have to be strong enough to keep together, and this trust of day-to-day life creates that basis, and to continue pushing forward, deal with the topics, not push them aside. We don't push them aside. Deal with the topics. There's a lot to talk about what happened in May. Deal with the topics and continue thriving for shared society. And another thing that happened was people, and that's very interesting to see, went back to their doing. They start to go out to demonstrate, and her organization. And also we created our own demonstrations, demonstrating for shared society in Israel within the days of violence. I'll just say we're still dealing with it, and there's aftershock, and it's not over. Many people think it's over. It's not over. There's a lot to deal with. There's a lot to talk about why it happened, how can we avoid it, and about the bigger picture of equality and shared society in Israel, which can prevent such events in the fight for equality. So that will be, that's what can prevent this from happening again. It's not only about how to stop violence, it's how to create a different society here in Israel. And I'll just add one more sentence. That's what many times people forget. They think, oh, the violence is over, now we can go on. No, we have to fight to change society, to strengthen equality in Israel, and that will prevent, and that will actually give us a better future here in Israel.
So Dani talked about taking the issues out into the streets and actually organizing, and very much that's Sally's expertise. We're out on the streets back then, and you're often involved in protests. You can find videos of Sally speaking to large groups of people, and I just want to hear a little about your experience at that time, which, as I recall, was quite dramatic. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's my personal expertise. I just think I'm lucky enough to be in a political home that empowers me to do the things that I do, which what we want to do that to thousands of people like me, Palestinians and Jewish citizens of Israel. Absolutely, for us, I absolutely agree with Dani that the goal was, of course, to end reach a ceasefire and end the aggression and end the violence here within Israel. But the real goal was, and that was very, very clear for us, is that we will not go back to the status quo. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is not to go back to the status quo, because we don't want to go back to a place where we're waiting for a ticking bomb to explode again, which what usually happens. We have cycles of violence. Of course, what happened here within mixed cities and in Israel was, I think you, Dani, put it very, very, most aspects of it weren't surprising. It wasn't surprising for me that, unfortunately, that young people in Lid and in Jaffa and in Haifa, extremely marginalized, enduring a lot of provocation, Palestinians enduring a lot of provocation, enduring a lot of, new Jewish groups coming in and really provoking them, the nationalist religious groups, Gar'inim, Turanim is what they're called, and they have been. I live in Jaffa, so I've seen these people really provoking on daily basis. So it wasn't very surprising for me that it erupted. I think what shocked us is the severity of the eruption from both sides, and really, but. The reaction was also unprecedented. The reaction that we got from people around us, it really showed us that shared society has really developed some kind of organizational capacity and some kind of ability to build a new narrative and actually mitigate this kind of crisis. Not perfectly, not as much as we want, but really in a way that didn't exist, for example, in October 2000, and it didn't exist even like 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And that's what I think that's our challenge at the moment as an Arab Jewish movement, is we don't just want to celebrate the fact that we were able to mobilize tens of thousands of peoples around ending the occupation, or ceasefire, around ending the cycle of violence within Israel, which is amazing, but really understanding how do we build this new kind of partnership that is also encompasses our narrative as Palestinians in Israel. I think that's something that has been a challenge for the Israeli left and for the Israeli society as a whole when we talk about Arab-Jewish partnership, because when you talk about us being Palestinians and our connection to what happens in the West Bank, in Gaza, it's political. And when it's political, Arab-Jewish relations within Israel become something that is much, much more complex. So that's one of our challenges at the moment. And it's a huge, huge, huge challenge. But the fact that we are at that point where we are actually thinking about that, I think is an amazing, it's an amazing stride, and it's an amazing point where we can actually envision that kind of partnership and envision a partnership that is truly powerful in a sense of understanding our power as people, and people who share interests, many multi-layered interests on so many different aspects of our lives here, our shared life and codependent life in Israel.
I mentioned before the emergence of an Arab party, actually an Islamist Muslim party headed by Mansour Abbas, as a political player, which is a new thing. But I want to put it even in a bigger way. We have a new government, refers to itself as the change government, following 12 years of prime minister by Netanyahu and Likud leadership in the government. And so if they call themselves change, is it a change? What has changed? Or is it same old, same old? Dani, I know you were at the Knesset. How were you received there?
I don't want to talk too much about the political side from the different parties and which party is a part of the government or not part of the government. We're an organization that has a large community with different views on different issues. And I think this is one of the issues that there are different views on it about around joining the government. What I would like to say, and I think that's from my point of view, is to see that we have partners who are interested in shared society, who are interested in bilingual education in Israel, who are interested in creating a more tolerant educational system. And I've been in the Knesset, and there was a conference dealing with shared society right after the violence of May. And I saw there a lot of interest and willingness in promoting education in Israel and making it part of the public education law. What I would like to say that, and this is also maybe continuing a bit what Sally was saying, that we do see an opportunity now. Out of these days, which were very tough days, and the violence of May, we do see opportunity because there is, people understand, you know, everybody likes to say this. At the end of the day, we're going to live here all together as one society, Palestinian Arabs and Jews within Israel. This is the way it is. And we have to now create a better society. We have to see it as an opportunity. And doing that is looking for all the fields in which we can create a better society. And we talked about, and Sally talked about the nation state law, which has to be canceled. We talk about housing. We talk about stopping discrimination. We talk about the Arabic language being part of the public sphere. We talk about the cultures being part of the public sphere. There's so many topics we need to deal with. We're talking about narratives that should be public and studied and learned within Israel. We're here to stay and we want to live here together. And this is what we have to deal with today. Now I'll say one thing about this government. To see an Arab party, and you can agree with it or disagree with it, to see an Arab party part of a coalition. In Israel, I see this, there's, again, you can view it as positive or negative about how the party is dealing with it, but they actually see that picture, sitting together, signing an agreement, being part of a coalition. I see that as something positive, which can help change the state of mind and take us and a government and the policies here to a better place altogether.
Sally, do you have anything to add on that?
I think I'm a little bit more cynical about Ram being in the coalition. It's just another right wing, you know, party that, you know, joined a predominant, you know, a dominantly right wing government. Unfortunately. About representation, I'm also very cynical in the sense that I don't think, you know, that's the thing. I always have a disclaimer of the fact that around 64%, you know, according to polls, 64% of voters actually are in favor of the party going into the coalition, Palestinian voters in Israel. So I'm probably one of the minority of the people who voted. But the kind of representation that they have in there is exactly the kind of conditional partnership that I was talking about before that we are trying to go past. Mansour Abbas and all of them there, and even Isawi Frij and Rana Ghinawi and Ibtisam Marani, they do great things. And I do think representation matters. It definitely does. I think I'm at a part or at a location where I feel like we still need to challenge that kind of representation. And I'm sorry for if I'm being, not politically correct, but the good Arab, like the Arabi Tov, that, accepts, the conditions of the partnership and also kind of dismisses and puts on the very, very, very deep, dark corner, our Palestinian narrative and our Palestinian identity and our insistence on that acknowledgement of our connection and our pain and our, history as Palestinians in Israel. And that's, I always, I'm cynical, not in a sense, I'm critical, less cynical, maybe critical of that, because I do want to believe that we need to challenge them to really improve that kind of representation, which I agree, we cannot dismiss it as something that is not important. It's of course important. But the opportunities are also beyond Iran being there, and the fact that they are talking about, unrecognized villages in the Naqab, in the Negev, and they're talking about the nation state law, and they're talking about many issues, the citizenship law. I think it's also the fact that we have a minister who, in health and in transportation and in environment, who are center left, and I think that's an amazing opportunity to advance symbolic but concrete wins for the left, who has abandoned these issues that are not political. They have depoliticized things that are extremely important for the Arab society in Israel, as well as the Jewish society, such as housing and environment and transportation and health. And I think these are things that this is an amazing opportunity to lead shared struggles that actually strengthens our partnership as Arabs and Jews in Israel.
So, I want to push you on this, and I know that you're saying you're critical. I also think that anyone involved in social change has some deep well of optimism there, or of some kind of hope. So I can't, even if you mentioned being cynical and critical, I can't imagine that you're not also on some level hopeful, or at least don't carry a vision. So I'd really like to hear from both of you, actually, how you shape that vision, how you assess progress toward this. It's a long game, right? We've got deep roots of difficulties. What would be some indicators for you of change? I think I'll maybe ask Dani to start with that, and go back to you, Sally. I know that you're seeking very, on a concrete level, you're seeking expansion of the program, recognition of the of Yad B'Yad school model as a stream of Jewish education. I would maybe call that a tactical goal. On a more wider vision kind of level, what are you looking for, and what would be the signs of success and progress towards that?
I put this one, and also going back to the previous question, we talk about representation, and I believe that the change comes in steps. And that's what we'll have to see, if the representation is a first step for a much deeper partnership, or it's going to stay at that level. I think that's the best for what's happening now on a political level. But it's also right on all other levels, because we have to see how we're taking steps. I'll give an example. I give an example in hand how the partnership brought people together. I'll give another example from another field that none of us are in. It's the business field. Within the violent days, we saw many businesses coming out, big companies coming out for shared society, open out on TV and big billboards and so on. That's a change. That didn't happen before. Take in consideration that also happened throughout the Gaza operation. It was violence within and violence with Gaza, and all this happened, and they came out. So that's why I'm saying we have to. We're looking at it, or I'm looking at it as steps. We have to push for more and more steps, and that's when these steps have to aim for a deep partnership, equality between Jews and Arabs in Israel. And it has to be I'd say breaking, if we want to put on one hand, or bridging between two societies like we're doing. We're separated in education. We're separated in our cities. We're separated many times in businesses. We're in so many places separated. It's about time we come together. And we come together in all these fields and create a strong partnership that's based on equality between all citizens of Israel. And that's what we're looking for. And in order to do this, so we have to see a change on a political level. We have to see a change in education. We have to see a change. And when I say education, I'm talking about the wide meaning of education, how we see each other, how we learn about each other, what we know about each other, how we accept different narratives and try to bridge between them in order to create here a society where Palestinian Arabs and Jews can both be strong in their identities, so we can also create our partnership between both groups or both societies. And I think these are very important topics in order to bring people to a place where they're willing to be real partners, deep partners, who say, yeah, we see each other on an equal level. Palestinian Arabs in Israel and Jews in Israel. We see ourselves on equal matters. And there's a lot of, it goes into economics, of course. It goes in building and cities and housing. There are many areas there, but the more we connect, the more we create the partnership, the stronger, the better we can move forward.
Thanks. And Sally, I want to push you and maybe challenge you to put forward the kind of the vision that you're working towards. And I know that your particular work stresses the importance of the identification of Arab Israelis, of Palestinian Israelis, with what's going on with Palestinians outside of the Green Line. And given the very, very difficult situation between Israel and the West Bank, and Israel and Gaza, do you see that is an obstacle towards being able to work towards shared society? In other words, I'm talking now about Jewish fear, and how does that play in with your vision of how you move forward, of how you have progress?
I wouldn't say that's a big part of our work, in a sense that it's, a big part of our work is ending the occupation and advancing peace, equality and social justice and economic justice and gender justice and environmental justice in Israel. That's our, big work. Reaching, building a politicized identity that is shared for Arabs and Jews in Israel, that's a tool. It's essential tool to really build the partnership, and to build it, we cannot, overcome or dismiss or neglect the fact that our story and our identity has not been part of this partnership ever. And it's not something that we do as, if you look at our work and at our, it's not something that we campaign for, in a sense. It's just something that we promote through everything that we do, because it's an essential step that the Israeli society needs to take in order to really move forward through a true equal partnership. Now, so that's one part of why, our big, you said that it's a big work, and I think there's an important distinction there. Now, we don't try to impose this narrative. There are many, we have a variety and a spectrum of people, Palestinians, and and even some that are not comfortable with that. We could talk about why they're not comfortable, and like the social sanctions in Israel that make them uncomfortable with identifying as Palestinians. But that's, it's still legitimate. And even the Jewish, we have Zionists, we have non-Zionists, and we have anti-Zionists, and we really have a very spectrum, and it's a very, very, very challenging thing to build a popular left in Israel, especially with such polarizations, Arab and Jewish, but also, Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, and you have like Ethiopians, and you have the Haredi, the Haredi and the secular, and you have so many polarizations within Israeli society that people, we always are very justifiably and understandably focused on the Arab-Jewish polarization, but there's so many other polarizations and segregations within Israeli society that are overlooked. And I think, and that's exactly why the first sentence that I told you is that we believe in a holistic view of how we look at things, and really necessarily acknowledging the interconnectedness of these complexities. How we do it, I think we are one of the very few organizations that are, we are actually planning to win. We're not just, we are methodologically developing new ways to organize, new ways to build power around issues, to actually better understand things, and also develop the skill of political imagination. Because if you ask the average Israeli today, Palestinian or Jewish, how does peace look like? How does gender equality look like? How does green economy look like? They wouldn't be able to tell you. We don't know. And that's a crucial point to really be able to imagine the change. And that's what organizing does, which is what we're trying to do. So I am always optimistic. You asked at the beginning, and that's our motto, where there's struggle, there's hope. And we truly believe in that, we work by it every day.
We haven't managed to solve the problems.
Surprisingly.
I know, very
So I want to thank you, Sally Abed, and you, Dani Elazar. And of course, a big thanks to you, all of our Times of Israel community members who support fast and fair independent journalism. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.